Good morning, vlog. It is Good Friday, April, 19th? Yeah, April 19th. And I have today off work. It's weird, but okay, I'll take it. And right now I am just going through what I hope is going to be not that long of a personal project, but kind of a short personal project. I've literally dusted off my 3D printer and trying to change a few things about it to hopefully get it back up and running again, because during work yesterday I was able to do some research on 3D printing or 3D modeling applications for the iPad that we can potentially use for the makerspace that we're creating on school campus, that will have not only a laser cutter but also some 3D printers apparently, and that's where I'm coming in with some 3D printing expertise in a way. So while I was doing that research and checking out some different 3D modeling applications, there was one, the name is escaping me right now. It's like 3dc.io or something like that. I'll find it later. I'll link it in the description down below whenever I post this to YouTube. But I was messing around with it, and I modeled basically a simple nameplate that has my name, Mr. Casper, on it. So I want to try and print that out and have that ready by the time we go back to school on Tuesday. Yes, that's right, Tuesday. We have a 4-day weekend now, and that is now plenty of time to do these side projects and to work on a few other things. So I have my 3D printer dusted off here. I already have my spool up. This is a layer of borosilicate glass that is supposed to help for just providing smoother bed adhesion and just easier cleanup and whatnot for it. Now these squares that you see, that is basically thermal transition film in a way that is supposed to transition the heat coming from the heat bed to the glass, so it allows the extruded plastic that I'm printing to adhere to the bed better. And I'm using these clamps to keep everything nice and in place so it doesn't shift around during printing and it potentially messes up a print. Now what I'm trying to do right now is to make sure that the bed is level, and so the print head can easily adhere to the bed. I haven't leveled it fully yet. I've been messing with the sensor on the side, which you can control using these screws here. You can raise or lower it. I have it in the next to highest position right now. I don't know if you can tell that on the video, but there are 4 different positions, and I have it currently in position 3. Position 4 would be the highest. So after the bed, the print head looks to be fairly close, and then I can fine tune using these guys here and these springs. So this top layer here is what's going to go up and down to do the fine tuning with leveling of the print head. So hopefully I can get this bed level and start printing off a benchmark type 3D printing file. And then I already used that 3D modeling program to export an STL file, which is a 3D printer file basically. I just need to put it into my slicing application, which basically takes that 3D printing model and slices it layer by layer that then are fed as instructions to the 3D printer, which then prints it out one layer at a time until you get the full 3D object that you wanted to print. So that's something that I'm doing quickly, somewhat quickly. And while that is printing, and if everything is going well, then I'm going to work on a few other things, because 3D printing can take a little bit of time, but I can multitask in a way by having that print job going and either cleaning up a little bit around the apartment or prepping for this afternoon. I am going to meet up with Pastor Adi to record something dealing with Holy Week. And so we have another episode to fill in during the gap that is made from this Easter Sunday, because we're not going to have any Sunday school at all. I actually had to bring the Z positioning switch. That's what that switch was that I showed you earlier. This guy, I had to bring it up to its highest notch setting, and then I did a basic level test for 3D printing, especially these types of printers that have a printing bed and an extruder that goes on top of it and just prints on top of it like that. It's called like basically just the paper test. Basically, you want your nozzle about like a fraction, like a millimeter, basically off the bed, or however much. Basically, it's the thickness of a piece of paper. So what I've done here is I've just cut a piece of paper out, and I do a quick bed level test because there are 4 points to level the bed, and I have the print nozzle to where the nozzle is off the bed. It's not scraping the bed. It's off the bed just enough to allow this paper to be between it and kind of freely be between it and the bed here. So I'm doing it just all across the bed, all 4 points. And as you can see, I may need to see it's dragging the piece of paper a little bit near that corner. So I'm going to have to re-level that corner just a little bit, lower it to allow that paper to not really move at all while the print head's going over it. All right, now that I have the bed leveled, it looks like, now to just turn this guy on, have that going. And now I need to remember how to connect to my Octopi print server. This little guy is a Raspberry Pi, and I've put on an operating system that allows it to be a 3D printing remote control server. And as you can see here, I have a little arm here that attaches to a webcam that's also attached to the Raspberry Pi, and that allows me to point it to my 3D printing bed and keep an eye on prints. Even if I may not be in the same room, I can actually go to the Raspberry Pi server on my phone, on my tablet, wherever, and actually see a live stream and see how the print's progressing, just to see whether it failed or not. So now I need to remember the IP address for the server so I can remote into it. So I was able to find out the IP address by linking into the HDMI port directly on the Octopi, because I forgot like the name, like the URL name. Usually it's local.octoprint or whatever. It's not able to resolve right now for whatever reason. So I just needed to directly connect through the IP address on my web browser, and right now I have it updating the software that's running on it right now. And now that I have it updated, this is the Octoprint control center in a way. So I can control the temperature of the tool, which is also known as the extruder, and also the bed, which is that base that's down below. So I can control the extruder head here, and I can control the temperature of the bed, all through this web interface. And then this is probably my favorite part here, is that I'm now tied into the webcam. So hello. And I can also control the positioning of the physical bed here. So if I click, well, am I connected? I may not be connected actually. After profile and connect. There, now I'm connected. So now I can now that I'm connected, I can actually control, say, like the positioning through the web interface here. I can make the bed go forward, go backward, certain steps. I can even control the Z-axis, which is the extruder head here. I can make it go up or down just from clicking on these buttons a little bit, and I'm making it move in 10 millimeter increments every time I'm clicking that button. If I wanted to make it 1 or even 0.1 millimeter increments, I can just go and select it this way. This is just really handy for prepping the machine for when I need it to print specific items, because I need to have the bed at a certain temperature. I need to have the nozzle at a certain temperature. Otherwise, it's not going to. The nozzle will not melt the PLA filament that I have up there, and it won't come through the nozzle correctly, and it won't adhere to the bed correctly. So this It's just what I like to use as a staging area in a way, because I can choose the specific temperature down to the down to the 10th of a degree on what I want on the machine, and then the Raspberry Pi will talk to the main board on my printer here and get those settings together for me. Now I have the extruder nozzle up to temp so that it can actually melt the filament that I have here. I've already thrown the filament through and put it into the main blockhead up here. And now what I need to do is actually feed it through the remainder of the blockhead and get it started coming out down here at the nozzle. Now what I like to do is I just do a little bit of a manual process here. I can navigate through a menu, go to extruder, and down to extruder position, and that gives me control over the motor here that actually turns a little knob inside that grips onto this and feeds it through millimeter by tenth of a millimeter by tenth of a millimeter, I guess. Or no, actually just 1 millimeter rather. So I just keep clicking this, and the more that I click it, eventually we're going to start seeing the filament come out from here. And I don't know if you can hear that a little bit, but let's see if we can. I should have it in just fine. It looks like we'll get there eventually. Sometimes it can take a little bit. Oh, you can see it coming out there. There we go. All right. I like to feed through a few extra millimeters and make sure we get a nice even flow coming out. All right, and everything seems to be feeding just fine. Always have to use some safety. Now I have my handy dandy pliers here that I use to just get this stuff out of the way, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. And now while we got that evened out, it feels like the bed is pretty much up to temp as well. So now I'm gonna prep the bed, the remainder of the bed, by adding a layer of a glue stick from one of these guys right here. And the reason why you want to add just a little bit of adhesive to the top of your bed is so that whenever you're finally starting your print, is that it'll adhere properly to the bed. That first layer, the adhesion, is really key for 3D printing, because that is your foundation that you're building off of. And if your base layer comes loose or fails to stick to the base at any point during the print, it can be catastrophic for the results of your print. So you definitely want to make sure you have good base adhesion. There are some other models and some other beds that you can get out there where you don't have to worry about adding anything down like that. Some people use hairspray, some people use painter's tape. I like to use glue. It's had the best results for me. It can be a little messy sometimes to clean off, and reset, but I like it. It gets me pretty good results whenever I print. I'm testing out printing right now is called a Benchy. It's pretty common on 3D printer forums and message boards and things like that. And this is the modeling software that I have, or rather the slicing software that I have. And this is this is what I'm going to be printing out. It's just a little boat, and this is how it's going to be oriented on the base plate. Whenever I start printing it out, it's going to be facing this bottom left corner here, because that's the starting point from where my print head goes. That corresponds to about this area. Here's where where the base homes, and so that means my Benchy is going to be facing this way as I print it out. Now to try this guy out, so I would find the Benchy here, and I don't want to download it. I want to go to the print icon and say load and print. So all I have to do is click on that, and it's going to the Octopi just sent the messages to print to my board, and it's feeding the instructions, and now it's homing all the axes. So the base plate is the y-axis. These two rods here, that's the x-axis, and then up and down, that's the z-axis. It's just going all to the center home here, positioned to start printing. Now hopefully this all goes according to plan. So usually it doesn't, but we'll see what happens. Please print properly. Okay, we're gonna see how this goes. I hope it prints properly. So it looks like we have a little bit of, it's kind of going well so far. I was looking at the very first layer, and I'll show this later if the print fully completes. But the first layer, there are still some gap lines you can see in between the different paths that the extruder is taking on that very first layer. And that can mean a couple of things. Either one, I have the extruder settings a little off to where I'm not extruding enough filament on that first layer for it to kind of squish down and fill in the gaps between all the different lines, or the bed just isn't close enough to the extruder nozzle for those gaps to be filled in. So it's one of those two. I can try to fine tune the leveling a little bit better, but I may just end up over extruding to squish it down. While that's printing, I can show you a few other features of Octoprint. So it gives you a little bit of an estimation. I find that this actually is not that too accurate. It usually takes a lot sooner than what it's estimating, but it still provides an estimate, which is nice. This is a time history of the temperature changes. So the red line is the extruder nozzle, the blue line is the base plate, and it just gives you a track like over time the temperature fluctuations that can happen. So, and it gives you a live feed of what the temperature is currently of each board, or whatever, of each contact, I should say. Over to the control area, here we go. Here's a live feed of the print as I can log into this print server later on my phone and look at the live feed, see how that's doing. And let's see, something that I like to watch sometimes is called the G-code viewer. It's going to take a second for it to fully render, but it's showing you in real time the instructions that are being sent to the 3D printer and what's being printed out. So here's a new layer coming up that's being loaded into the printer right now, and this looks like a fill layer. So these are the fill lines that are happening in between, and now it's laying down the border across the entire print. And then once it's done with that layer, it's going to move on to the next one. While I'm waiting on this guy to finish printing, I'm going to go ahead and look up the 3D model that I made on the iPad app yesterday and for my nameplate. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up real quick. I saved it to my OneDrive, and so here it is, mrcasper.stl, and I'm going to load that into Cura, and we're going to see what happens. I may actually have to reopen it or something. Alright, let's try this again. Okay, it is gigantic, but thankfully I can scale this down if need be. Alright, so I have it scaled down and rotate it a little bit so it fits flat on the bed. So as you can see, it should be a 100% flat surface here, and that's what goes onto the bed. Hopefully, I'm hoping that I may need to modify it. No, thankfully I think it's all flat down there. But then on the top, I have a little bit of a lip here just to provide some 3D effect whenever I have it fully printed out. And then look, there's my name, Mr. Casper. I'm kind of zoomed in here on the model, and I have the layer view on, and it allows me to see how the print may happen, or will happen rather, when I send this over to the 3D printer. So the red lines here are is the first outer shell that's exposed, outside, and these solid green lines are the additional shell layers that go that go into each layer, rather each shell, I guess. These yellow lines are the fill portion of the layer, which means that, so it's not a hollow model whenever you print it out. There's some filament that's laid inside these gaps where otherwise there would just be air, just to help provide some more stability to the print as you continue on, or also to just add a little bit more weight. If you want the model that you want to print to just be completely hollow inside, you'll do a 0% infill. But right now I have it at a 25% infill just to see how it looks. And even let me show you what happens if I go up here and I do, let's say, 50% infill. It's going to re-render everything. I'll take it a second to show back up with the infill layers. Let me see if I can change it up a little bit. Oh, maybe I have it. There we go. Okay. So that's what a 50% infill is. And of course, if you want this thing to be just solid filament, you would have it at 100%. But typically you don't need to do that for most of your prints, because otherwise you're just going to be wasting plastic, wasting money. You don't need to do 100% fill in unless you need like a really solid piece, like say you're making a tool or something that needs to be really rigid and resist a lot of force. But otherwise, like this, whenever you print something out, if you have the adhesion correctly and you have the layers laying down correctly, then it'll be a fairly solid piece no matter what you do with it. And having just a 20% infill would be the max that you really need to go. So here's what it looks like with a 20% infill, and that looks pretty good. I like it. So I may just go ahead and keep that. Now, these blue lines that you see going every which way, that's the travel path that the extruder is going to take in order to continue laying down filament at different points of this layer. So for example, there's going to be a head travel from here to here to here to here, or something along those lines, so it can properly lay down the filament in the pattern that I have predefined here, in a combination between these outer shells, the outer shell, the inner shells, and the fill layer right here. Those are all the different paths that the printhead's going to have to take in order to accomplish laying down the filament in this pattern that I already have laid out. Let's do a little check on our Benchy progress. It looks like it's coming along nicely. I mean, this is kind of the easier part of the Benchy. The hard part is when we get to the top, to the end, where it's printing the roof and whatnot of the boat. And there are some archways that are really difficult for it to fully print out. So that's the part that I always have an issue with when printing out these Benchies. So we're just going to have to wait near the end of the process to see how the settings that I have right now will affect the arches. And that can be fixed by changing potentially the temperature of the nozzle, because different filaments melt at different points. Even the coloration, if it's the same type of filament, even the coloration of it can affect the temperature at which it melts properly. All right, we're finally at the arches here, and it looks like they're working pretty well. Not too bad. There's a little bit of droop. That's always something that I've found with the filament that I use. There's a little bit of a droop. I need to look into fixing that. It might be because the nozzle is too hot and the filament isn't cooling quickly enough when it's getting at the peak of that overhang there. But I'll be able to, once it's finished, it's almost done. Once it's finished, I can take it off the bed and show you a little bit better what I'm talking about in terms of that overhang. And then there's a droop that happens at the top. All right, so the print is done, and the bed and nozzle are cooling right now. That's kind of part of the cool down, the finishing process, so that just everything kind of cools down and whatnot. And here's the final product here, and I wonder if I can just take it off. Let's see if I just twist it enough. There we go. Pops right off. And here it is. See, like right there at the top of the arch there, how it droops down just a little bit, and there's a circular wheelhouse hole here, and it droops just a little bit at the top as well. Let's see, just looking at this, it looks like some layers may get squished a little. See how it's bulging out there ever so slightly on the sides. And especially up here, you can kind of see it looks like maybe some of these layers are just getting a little too squished or something. Maybe I'm going too fast. I don't know. That's just part of the 3D printing process is to find out what settings work with the software that you have, and just to see about just constant improvement. But for right now, like, this is actually not too bad of a print in my opinion, I think. But I mean, because it came out solid, like it did not catastrophically fail. There's just some fine tuning that we can do to definitely increase the print quality on this guy. All right, vlog here at church. Just we finished with the noon Good Friday service, and then I also just finished. I probably should have taken some pictures and whatnot, but I just finished with recording a great podcast and interview type episode with Pastor Adi that will be coming out this coming Wednesday. So be on the lookout for it. I think this is a really good supplemental podcast for the upcoming for this Holy Week that we're in the middle of right now on Good Friday. And yeah, it was just a really great discussion, just from a kind of like a meditation, a devotional almost, that Pastor Adi found that he subscribed to for like an email newsletter. And I think it sparked some really good discussion that pertains to how we treat one another and how we may be able to talk with one another, not attributing blame or anything like that, while also still holding other people accountable for whatever actions they may do that may not settle well with the Christian morality perspective. If that sounds confusing, don't worry. We clear it up and we dive into it much more in depth in this upcoming episode on Wednesday. By all means, I'll link to it in the description down below whenever I upload this video to YouTube. But now I am going to head back to the apartment and just work on a few other things there to help finish the rest of the day. While I'm back at the apartment, I'm firing up the 3D printer again, and while I was printing out this guy, I was just looking at another 3D printing application, a slicer, if you will. That's what takes a 3D object, a 3D printable object, an STL file, and formats it into little layers that you can then feed as instructions to the 3D printer to print out the object you want to create. And I found this application called Slicer with an E, Slicer, and so I'm just putting a Benchy on there, and while I had the previous Benchy printing, I went on ahead and configured the Slicer application to have all the proper configurations, or at least a good benchmark starting point to see how well this prints out as well. Because this is very much a hobby of fine tuning and tinkering, and there are just so many different options in terms of just slicing applications that can slice these 3D model files into different chunks. You have Cura, you have Slicer, you have there are like a dozen other ones, and they all interact differently with the various pieces of hardware, because there's no real standardized piece of hardware when it comes to 3D printers. So a lot of this is just experimentation and finding out what works for you, for your printer in general, and for the parts that you have already attached to the printer. There's a ton of modification that you can do with the 3D printer. As you can see, I printed out a few items like that. I have, like, down here is a fan cooling accessory that I printed out, and then this is also a feeding accessory that mounts underneath the spool to help make a cleaner feed of filament. Okay, I made sure that it started off just fine-ish, and so I'm gonna go and make a little bit something to eat because I have not had anything at all today so far, except for a couple of peanuts. So I just finished with the slicer rendition of Benchy, and it looks a little bit better. There are some other concerns, though, I have with it, and let me flip this around real quick. So, as you can see here on the left, I have the Cura slicer that I printed the first Benchy on, and then on the right is the slicer that I printed the most recent Benchy with. Now, something that I can notice right off the bat is with the Cura, kind of see these waves. You can actually even see the wavy part right here, right next to this hole here in the hull. You can kind of see those waves along right after. Now, as you can see on the slicer one, those waves are not there at all. They're actually not really present anywhere along these Benchies. What I think that's maybe able to reduce this on the Cura side by just slowing down the print speed a little bit, because this may be caused from jerkiness on this belt that I have. As it's sliding it back and forth, it stops abruptly, and there's a tensioner in here that's on a spring, and it makes this belt a little bit loose as a result, and it can lose tension when this much mass up here is traveling really fast, and then it stops abruptly and it kind of jerks back and forth a little bit. I think that's what's causing those waves there. Something else that I wanted to note real quick is if you look on the vertical side here on each one of the Benchies, you can see there is a distinct change in the pattern, especially on the one that I use slicer on. As it comes up to about this point here, it changes. There's some sort of Z-axis stepper motor issue that's happening along. At least that's what I think it is, because as you can see, if I come in a little bit closer, the pattern changes. It looks pretty uniform up to this point. Then it changes all of a sudden, and it becomes a little bit tighter, a little bit more solid. And I don't know if that's because the stepper motor just had a hiccup or something, and it's not stepping as much as it used to from here, or what. So I may need to look in my slicer settings a little bit more just to see what's happening right there, because it looks like it may, I don't know if it's stopped along this route or not. But overall, though, I mean, I kind of like the slicer rendition a little bit more, just because I mean the top layer here, it looks maybe slightly, I don't know, like up here it looks a little bit different on the Cura, and then this looks just a little bit cleaner on the slicer. I kind of like this. But to say, I am probably going to use the slicer rendition to print out my nameplate that I'm going to take back to school on Tuesday and put on my desk. Back at church again, and now needing to do sound check for our evening cantata. So I'm going and grabbing some final audio equipment, and then we're going to do an audio check and a little bit of a warm-up before we dive right into the Good Friday cantata. Hakuna Cantata. Finished with the cantata, and now it's time to do a little bit of relaxation with a few friends visiting up in Frisco for a little while. And then gonna call it a night. I'm already a little tired, but we'll see what happens. Back at home, but before I go to sleep, I'm checking to make sure this print's going all right. The first couple of layers are down, and then I'll keep the light on and the camera on it, and I'll check on the live stream throughout the evening. I guess that wraps up this Good Friday, and on to Saturday. Have a good night.